The dust devil that rose from the valley floor seemed like an omen when Hannah Fletcher first saw the sprawling ranch below. Her vision blurred by 3 days without proper water, and the fever that had been building since she crossed into California. Her mare stumbled again, the left foreleg nearly buckling completely this time, and Hannah knew with grim certainty that neither of them would make it much farther. The September heat of 1878 bore down mercilessly on the grasslands surrounding what she would later learn was Chico, California, a place she had been heading toward based on nothing more than a rumor of work, and a desperate need to disappear from everything she had left behind in Nevada. She had not expected the land to be so beautiful even through her delirium. The valley stretched wide and green in patches where irrigation had worked its magic, and cattle dotted the landscape like scattered stones. Through the haze of fever, she could make out a ranch house in the distance, sturdy and real, and several outbuildings that spoke of prosperity and permanence. These were things Hannah had not known in so long she had almost forgotten they existed. Her father's failed mining venture, her mother's death from pneumonia, her brother's disappearance into the mountains searching for silver that did not exist, all of it had led her here, to this moment, swaying in a saddle on a horse that could barely walk. The mare took another faltering step, and Hannah felt herself sliding. She tried to grip the saddle horn, but her hands would not cooperate properly. The ground came up fast and hard, and she tasted dust and blood where she bit her lip. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard hoofbeats, strong and steady, nothing like the broken gait of her own mount. "Easy now. Do not try to move just yet." The voice was deep and calm, the kind of voice that suggested its owner had dealt with trouble before and was not inclined toward panic. Hannah forced her eyes open and found herself looking up at a man who seemed to block out the sun entirely. He was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of the summer sky. He wore work-worn clothes and a black hat pushed back on his head, and when he knelt beside her, she could smell horse and leather and honest sweat. "My horse," Hannah managed to croak out. "She is hurt. I see that." He glanced over to where the mare stood trembling, head hanging low. "Looks like you are not doing much better yourself. Can you tell me your name?" "Anna. Hannah Fletcher." She tried to sit up and the world spun viciously. His hand steadied her shoulder, firm but gentle. "Well, Hannah Fletcher, I am Henry Blackwell, and this is my land you have collapsed on." "How long since you had water?" "I do not remember." It was the truth. Time had become strange somewhere in the Nevada desert. Henry stood and moved to his horse, returning with a canteen. He helped her sit up slowly, supporting her back with one arm while he held the canteen to her lips with his other hand. "Small sips, not too fast or you will just bring it back up." The water was the most glorious thing Hannah had ever tasted. She wanted to gulp it down, to drain the entire canteen, but he was careful with it, pulling it away when she tried to drink too much. When he was satisfied she had enough for the moment, he stood and walked over to her mare. Hannah watched him run his hands down the horse's injured leg with a practiced touch, speaking softly to the nervous animal. The gentleness of his movements surprised her. Most men she had known were rough with animals, impatient. "The good news is it is not broken," Henry called over to her. "Looks like a bad sprain and possibly an abscess in the hoof. She has been favoring it for a while, I would guess. 2 days. Hannah closed her eyes against another wave of dizziness. "I knew I should have stopped, but I needed to keep moving, running from something or toward something." The question was casual, but Hannah heard the real inquiry beneath it. "Does it matter?" "I suppose not." Henry was quiet for a moment, then she heard his boots in the dust as he approached. "Here is what is going to happen. I am going to put you on my horse and lead your mare back to the ranch." My foreman can look after her while I get you inside and call for the doctor. I cannot pay you." The words came out harder than Hannah intended, sharpened by pride and desperation in equal measure. "Did I ask you to?" Henry crouched down beside her again, and this time when their eyes met, Hannah saw no judgment there, only a quiet kindness that made her throat tighten. "You are hurt and your horse is hurt. Out here, we help people who need it. Everything else can wait until you are not half dead from fever." He lifted her as though she weighed nothing, and Hannah was too weak to protest. His horse was a magnificent chestnut gelding that stood rock steady as Henry settled her in the saddle and then swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist, holding her secure against his chest, and Hannah wanted to object to the intimacy of it, but could not find the energy. Her head dropped back against his shoulder as he gathered the reins of her mare and started toward the ranch at a careful walk. "How far did you come?" Henry asked after a while, his voice rumbling through his chest against her back. "Nevada. A town called Silver Creek that is barely a town anymore. That is a hard ride even on a good horse. It was necessary." Hannah did not elaborate and Henry did not push. They rode in silence for a while, the gentle swaying of the horse almost lulling her to sleep despite everything. She forced herself to stay awake, to maintain some shred of dignity, but it was a losing battle. "We are almost there," Henry said softly. "Just hold on a little longer." The ranch house was larger up close, a solid two-story structure with a wide porch and actual glass windows. Hannah caught a glimpse of a barn that looked newer than the house, corrals with good fencing, and several men working with horses in the distance. This was not some struggling homestead, barely scratching survival from the earth. This was a successful operation, the kind of place Hannah had not seen since before her father's fortunes collapsed. Henry guided his horse right up to the porch and dismounted smoothly, then reached up to lift Hannah down. Her legs would not support her weight and she sagged against him. Without hesitation, he scooped her up again and carried her toward the house. "Miguel." Henry called out and one of the men working near the barn looked up. "Take care of the mare. Bad sprain on the left foreleg and check the hoof for an abscess. Be gentle with her. She has been through hell." The man jogged over, taking the mare's reins with a nod of understanding. Henry kicked open the door and carried Hannah inside to a house that was surprisingly well kept for a bachelor's home. The furniture was simple but solid, the floors were clean, and the curtains on the windows looked like they had been sewn by someone who knew what they were doing. Henry laid her on a long sofa in what appeared to be a sitting room and disappeared briefly, returning with more water and a damp cloth. He pressed the cloth to her forehead, and Hannah nearly whimpered at how good the coolness felt. "The fever is pretty high," Henry said, more to himself than to her. "I am going to ride to town for Doc Martinez. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, will be back soon from visiting her daughter. She will sit with you until I return. You do not have to do all this." Hannah's protest was weak even to her own ears. "I know I do not have to." Henry stood, looking down at her with an expression she could not quite read. "But I am going to anyway. Rest now. You are safe here." He was gone before Hannah could respond, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, the door closing firmly behind him. She lay on the sofa, staring up at the ceiling beams, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She had ridden into this valley expecting nothing, hoping for very little, and instead had found a man who treated strangers with the kind of decency she had almost forgotten existed in the world. Sleep pulled at her with insistent hands, and this time Hannah let herself sink into it. When she woke, the light had changed. Late afternoon sun slanted through the windows in golden bars, and Hannah could hear someone moving around in what must be the kitchen. The smell of something cooking made her stomach clench with hunger so fierce it was painful. She tried to sit up and managed it this time, though the room swayed alarmingly before settling. "Ah, you are awake." A woman appeared in the doorway, small and compact with graying black hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her face was lined with years of hard work, but her eyes were sharp and assessing. "I am Mrs. Chen. Mr. Henry told me about you before he rode for the doctor. How are you feeling?" "Like I have been dragged behind a horse for several miles," Hannah admitted. "Mrs. Chen made a sound that might have been a laugh. "That is honest, at least. I have made broth. You will eat some and drink more water. The doctor should be here within the hour." "I am sorry to be such trouble." Hannah accepted the cup of broth Mrs. Chen brought, wrapping her hands around its warmth. "I did not mean to impose on anyone. Mr. Henry does not see helping people as an imposition." Mrs. Chen settled into a chair across from Hannah, her posture upright and proper. "He is a good man. This valley is lucky to have him." Hannah sipped the broth carefully. It was simple but flavorful, exactly what her abused stomach needed. "Has he owned the ranch long?" "5 years. He bought it when the previous owner died without heirs. It was in poor condition then, but Mr. Henry worked hard to build it into what it is now. He treats his workers fairly, pays honest wages, and does not tolerate cruelty to animals or people. That is rare enough in this world." The older woman's tone suggested she was delivering information Hannah needed to know, establishing Henry's character as someone trustworthy. Hannah appreciated it even as she wondered why Mrs. Chen felt the need to do so. Then again, she supposed she must look like exactly the kind of person who needed such reassurances, filthy, desperate, riding a lame horse into a stranger's valley with nothing but the clothes on her back. "How is my horse?" Hannah asked. "Miguel is tending to her. He is very good with animals. If she can be helped, he will help her." Mrs. Chen stood, smoothing her apron. "Finish that broth. I will bring more water. You are badly dehydrated." Hannah did as she was told, too tired and sore to do anything else. By the time she finished the broth, her eyelids were drooping again. She set the cup aside carefully and let herself lean back against the sofa cushions. Just a moment's rest, she told herself. Just until the doctor arrived. The sound of voices woke her. Hannah opened her eyes to find the room dim with evening shadows and 2 men standing near the doorway. Henry and an older gentleman with silver-streaked hair and a neat beard, carrying a worn leather medical bag. "Miss Fletcher." The older man approached with a professional smile. "I am Dr. Raymond Martinez. Mr. Blackwell tells me you have had quite an ordeal." Hannah struggled to sit up properly, and Henry moved quickly to adjust the pillows behind her back, his hands careful and impersonal. She was acutely aware of how she must look, her dress stained and torn, her hair a tangled mess. Dust still caked on her skin where she had not had a chance to wash. Dr. Martinez conducted his examination with efficient thoroughness, checking her temperature, listening to her breathing, looking at her eyes and throat. He asked questions about her journey and her symptoms, nodding occasionally at her answers. "Well, Miss Fletcher, you are severely dehydrated and suffering from heat exhaustion, but I do not believe there is anything more serious wrong with you. You need rest, fluids, and proper food. A week of taking it easy should set you right." He closed his bag with a decisive snap. "You were very fortunate Mr. Blackwell found you when he did. Another day in your condition could have been considerably worse." "Thank you, doctor." Hannah's voice was hoarse. "I do not suppose you know of anyone in town looking to hire. I will need work once I am recovered." Dr. Martinez exchanged a glance with Henry that Hannah could not interpret. "I will ask around. What kind of work are you looking for? Anything honest? I can cook, clean, mend, work with horses. I helped my father with his mining operation before it ended. I am not afraid of hard work. I will keep that in mind. The doctor turned to Henry. Make sure she rests. Mrs. Chen will know what to feed her. I will check back in a few days. Henry walked the doctor out, and Hannah could hear them talking in low voices on the porch, though she could not make out the words. When Henry returned, he carried an oil lamp which he set on the table nearby, filling the room with warm light. Mrs. Chen is preparing a room for you upstairs, Henry said. You will stay here until you are well enough to make other arrangements. Mr. Blackwell, I cannot, Henry. And yes, you can. Unless you have somewhere else to go. He waited, and when Hannah did not answer, he nodded. That is what I thought. You are staying. Now, are you hungry enough for actual food? Hannah wanted to argue to maintain some independence, but what would be the point? She had nowhere else to go and no resources to get there. Pride was a luxury she could not afford. Yes, thank you. Good. I will tell Mrs. Chen. He moved toward the door, then paused. Your mare is settled in the barn. Miguel cleaned the abscess and wrapped the leg. He thinks she will be fine with time and rest. Something in Hannah's chest loosened at that news. The mare had been with her through everything, bought with the last of her father's money before he died. Knowing the horse would recover felt like the first piece of good fortune she had experienced in months. Thank you, she said again, and this time the words carried the weight of everything she could not express. Henry just nodded and left her to the lamplight and the gathering darkness beyond the windows. The next 3 days passed in a haze of sleep and small meals. Mrs. Chen proved to be a benevolent tyrant, insisting Hannah rest and bringing up food at regular intervals. The room Hannah had been given was simple but comfortable, with a real bed, clean linens, and a window that looked out over the valley. She could see cattle grazing in the distance and sometimes catch glimpses of Henry and his men working the ranch. On the 4th day, Hannah felt strong enough to insist on coming downstairs. She had bathed that morning with water Mrs. Chen had heated for her, washing away days of travel grime, and pulled on the clean dress the housekeeper had somehow procured. It was plain brown cotton, a bit loose through the shoulders but otherwise serviceable. Her own clothes had been laundered and mended, but Hannah could not bring herself to put them back on yet. They reminded her too much of everything she was trying to leave behind. She made her way down the stairs carefully, still a bit weak, and found the house quiet. Following the sound of movement, she discovered Mrs. Chen in the kitchen, working on what looked like preparations for the noon meal. You should be resting, Mrs. Chen said without looking up from the vegetables she was chopping. I have been resting for days. I am going to lose my mind if I stay in that bed any longer. Hannah moved closer, watching the efficient way the older woman worked. Let me help, please. I need to feel useful. Mrs. Chen studied her for a long moment, then gestured to a pile of potatoes. Those need peeling. Think you can manage it without fainting? I can manage it. Hannah took up the paring knife and a potato, settling into the familiar rhythm of kitchen work. It felt good to do something productive, to contribute in some small way to the household that had taken her in. They worked in companionable silence for a while before Mrs. Chen spoke again. Mr. Henry will be in for dinner soon. He has been working since before dawn repairing fence line in the north pasture. He works very hard, always has. When he first came here, people thought he was too young to run a ranch this size. He proved them wrong. Mrs. Chen's tone carried clear approval. He is fair and honest. The men who work for him respect him. Hannah filed away this information, building a picture of Henry Blackwell in her mind. Everything she had seen supported Mrs. Chen's assessment. He had helped a stranger without hesitation, provided care without expectation of payment, and treated everyone around him with quiet decency. It was so different from the men Hannah had known in the mining camps. Rough, often cruel men who saw kindness as weakness and took what they wanted without conscience. The door opened, and Henry himself appeared, pulling off his hat and hanging it on a peg by the entrance. He was dusty and tired, his shirt stained with sweat and dirt, but he smiled when he saw Hannah in the kitchen. "You are looking considerably better than the last time I saw you," he said. "Feeling stronger. Much. Thank you for everything you have done." Hannah set down the potato she had been peeling, suddenly nervous under his direct gaze. "I know I keep saying that, but I mean it. I do not know what would have happened if you had not found me. You would have found help somewhere else, I am sure." Henry moved to the sink and pumped water to wash his hands and face. "This is decent country. Most people would have done the same." "I am not sure that is true, but it is kind of you to say." Hannah picked up another potato, needing something to do with her hands. "Dr. Martinez said he would ask about work opportunities in town. I will start looking as soon as I am strong enough to make the ride." Henry dried his face on a towel, his expression thoughtful. "About that, I have been thinking I could use someone here at the ranch." Hannah's hands stilled. "What do you mean?" "Mrs. Chen manages the house, but she has been saying for months that she needs help. Her daughter recently married and moved to Sacramento, and her son is working on a ranch up north. She is not as young as she used to be, though she will skin me if she hears me say that." Henry glanced at Mrs. Chen, who made a dismissive sound but did not argue. "You said you can cook, clean, and work with horses. That covers most of what needs doing around here." "I do not understand." Hannah looked between Henry and Mrs. Chen, trying to read the situation. "You are offering me a job just like that, just like that." Henry leaned against the counter, his posture relaxed but his eyes serious. "I pay fair wages, provide room and board. The work is not easy, but it is honest. You would be helping Mrs. Chen with the household duties and possibly assisting Miguel with the horses when needed. He has been training some young stock and could use an extra pair of hands." It was too good to be true, which immediately made Hannah suspicious. No one gave away anything for free in her experience. There was always a cost, always something expected in return. "Why?" The question came out more bluntly than she intended. "You do not know me. I could be running from the law for all you know." "Are you?" Henry asked mildly. "No." "Then I am not concerned. Look, Miss Fletcher, Hannah." "Hannah." He said her name carefully, like he was testing how it felt. "I do not know what happened to you before you rode into this valley, and I am not going to pry. But I can see you need a new start, and I have work that needs doing. It seems like a practical arrangement to me." "Practical," Hannah repeated. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this offer was as straightforward as he made it sound. But years of disappointment and betrayal had taught her to be cautious. "And if I am not good enough at the work, if you decide you made a mistake, then we will deal with that if it happens, but somehow I doubt it will." Henry straightened, picking up his hat. "Think about it. You do not have to decide right now. In the meantime, you are welcome to stay here while you continue recovering. No strings attached." He left the kitchen before Hannah could respond, his boots heavy on the stairs as he headed up to clean up properly for the meal. Hannah stood holding the half-peeled potato, her mind racing. "He means what he says," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "Mr. Henry does not make offers he does not intend to honor. If he says there is work for you here, then there is work. And if he says you are welcome regardless of your decision, then you are welcome. It seems too easy." Hannah set down the potato and the knife, her hands trembling slightly. "Things like this do not just happen. Perhaps they do not happen in the world you came from, but this is Mr. Henry's ranch, and he runs it according to his own principles." Mrs. Chen's expression softened slightly. I came to this house 8 years ago with nothing but the clothes on my back and my 2 children. My husband had died, we had no family willing to help, and I was desperate. Mr. Henry's father, God rest his soul, gave me work and a home. When Mr. Henry inherited the ranch, he could have replaced me with someone younger, stronger. Instead, he gave me a raise and told me I had a place here for as long as I wanted it. That is the kind of man he is. Hannah absorbed this information, feeling something shift inside her chest. Hope was a dangerous thing, she had learned. It could make you careless, vulnerable. But standing in this warm kitchen with the smell of food cooking and the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, she felt hope stirring despite her best efforts to suppress it. "I will think about it," Hannah said finally. "That is all I can promise right now. That is all anyone asks." Mrs. Chen returned to her work, and Hannah picked up the knife once more, finishing the potatoes while her thoughts spun in circles. The dinner that followed was surprisingly pleasant. Henry came back downstairs in clean clothes, his hair damp from washing, and they sat at the large kitchen table together. Henry, Hannah, Mrs. Chen, and Miguel, who had been invited in from the barn. The food was simple but abundant, and the conversation flowed easily. Miguel proved to be a cheerful man in his 40s with a ready laugh and an obvious affection for horses that matched Hannah's own. "Your mare is doing well," Miguel told Hannah between bites of beef stew. "The swelling in her leg has gone down considerably. In another week, she should be able to walk without pain. She will need careful exercise after that to build her strength back up. Thank you for taking such good care of her." Hannah meant it deeply. "She means a lot to me, I can tell. She is a good horse, well trained. You did that yourself." "My brother helped when she was younger. He had a way with horses." Hannah paused, old grief catching in her throat. "He has been gone for 2 years now, disappeared into the mountains looking for silver. I am sorry." Miguel's sympathy was genuine and uncomplicated. Losing family is hard. "It is." Hannah took a breath, pushing past the sadness. "But the mare remembers his training. She has been the best companion I could have asked for." After the meal, Henry invited Hannah to walk with him to the barn to see the mare for herself. The evening air was cooling rapidly as the sun set, and Hannah was grateful for the shawl Mrs. Chen had lent her. They walked in silence at first, Henry adjusting his longer stride to match her slower pace, still weak from her ordeal. The barn was a testament to good management, clean, well organized, with a dozen horses in various stalls. Miguel had clearly been maintaining it with care. Henry led Hannah to a stall near the end where her mare stood, head up alertly at their approach. "Hey, girl," Hannah murmured, reaching through the bars to stroke the horse's soft nose. The mare whickered softly, pressing into her touch. "You are looking so much better." "Miguel has a gift," Henry said, leaning against the stall door. "I am lucky to have him. He came from Mexico 5 years ago looking for work. Some of the other ranchers in the area would not hire him because of where he was from. Their loss was my gain." Hannah heard the message beneath the words. Henry hired based on ability and character, not prejudice. It aligned with everything else she had learned about him, building a picture of a man whose values ran deep and true. "You have built something good here," Hannah said, still petting her mare. "Mrs. Chen told me some of the history. Your father started this ranch, he did, but barely. He bought the land with money he saved from working cattle drives up north. By the time I was old enough to help, he was already sick. He held on long enough to teach me what I needed to know, then died the winter I turned 20. Henry's voice carried old pain, softened by time but never fully healed. "I have been running things on my own for 5 years now. Some days I feel like I know what I am doing. Other days I am just making it up as I go. You hide it well." Hannah turned to face him, studying his profile in the lamplight. He was handsome in a rough-hewn way. She realized not pretty but strong-featured and solid. The kind of face that would age well, growing more distinguished rather than worn. Everyone I have spoken to thinks you are doing a fine job. Everyone you have spoken to works for me and knows better than to say otherwise. There was humor in Henry's voice, a lightness that made Hannah smile despite herself. Mrs. Chen does not strike me as the type to hold her tongue if she disagreed with something. Fair point. Henry pushed off from the stall door, his expression growing more serious. Have you thought any more about my offer? I do not mean to pressure you, but I would like to know what you are thinking. Hannah took a breath, centering herself. This was the moment she could accept and commit herself to staying, or she could refuse and move on to town, to uncertainty and the struggle of starting over alone. Every instinct honed by years of disappointment told her to be cautious, to protect herself, to expect betrayal. But standing here in this well-kept barn on this successful ranch with this decent man, Hannah found herself wanting to take the risk. I will stay, she said quietly. I will work for you, but I have conditions. Name them. I pay my own way. I want fair wages, like you said, but I also want to contribute to my room and board. I am not looking for charity. Hannah lifted her chin, defiant. And if either of us decides this is not working out, we part ways with no hard feelings. I will not stay where I am not wanted, and you should not feel obligated to keep me on if I am not pulling my weight. Those are reasonable conditions. Henry extended his hand. Do we have an agreement? Hannah looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, then reached out and clasped it firmly. His grip was warm and calloused, the handshake of a working man. We have an agreement. Good. Henry held her hand a moment longer than strictly necessary, and Hannah felt a flutter of something unfamiliar in her stomach, awareness, attraction, possibility. Then he released her and stepped back, professional distance reasserting itself. You can start when Dr. Martinez clears you to work. Until then, continue resting and regaining your strength. Mrs. Chen will show you around tomorrow and explain what your duties will be. They walked back to the house together through the gathering darkness, and Hannah felt something she had not felt in years, a sense of belonging, fragile and new but undeniably real. She was still a stranger here, still an outsider with secrets and a past she was not ready to share. But she was also, for the first time in longer than she could remember, not alone. The days that followed fell into a comfortable pattern. Hannah regained her strength steadily under Mrs. Chen's watchful care, and as she did, she began taking on more responsibility around the house. Mrs. Chen proved to be an excellent teacher, patient but exacting, quick to correct mistakes, but equally quick to praise good work. Together, they managed the household duties, keeping the ranch house clean and organized, preparing meals for Henry and the handful of men who worked the property, and maintaining the large garden that provided much of their vegetables. Hannah discovered she genuinely liked the work. It was satisfying in a way her previous life had never been. Tangible results from honest effort. No gambling on whether a mine shaft would pan out or whether the next town would have opportunities. Here, if she worked hard, she could see the direct results. A clean kitchen, a well-cooked meal, mended shirts hanging on the line. Small things, perhaps, but they mattered. She also spent time with Miguel in the barn once Dr. Martinez pronounced her fully recovered. Miguel was teaching her his techniques for working with the young horses, showing her how to gentle them rather than break their spirits. It was a revelation to Hannah, who had learned horsemanship from her brother but had never seen anyone approach training with such patience and respect for the animals. You are good at this, Miguel told her one afternoon as they worked with a skittish 2-year-old filly. You have the feel for it. Not everyone does. My brother always said horses know when you are afraid of them. You have to be calm and confident, even when you are not sure what you are doing. Hannah kept her voice low and soothing as she ran her hand down the filly's neck. I think he would have liked your methods. He taught you well. Miguel leaned against the corral fence watching her work. You know, when Mr. Henry told me he was hiring you, some of the men in town had opinions about it. Hannah's hand stilled on the filly's shoulder. What kind of opinions? The usual ignorant kind. A young woman alone, no family, no references. People talked. Miguel's expression was serious now. I tell you this not to upset you, but so you know. Mr. Henry shut that talk down fast, told anyone who had a problem with his hiring decisions that they could keep their opinions to themselves. He does not care what small minds think. I see. Hannah resumed stroking the filly, processing this information. She had known people would gossip. It was inevitable given the circumstances of her arrival. But knowing Henry had defended her without her even being aware of it stirred something warm and complicated in her chest. He is a good man, Miguel continued. Fair and honest. The kind of man you can trust. That is rare enough in this world. So I am learning. Hannah focused on the horse, unwilling to examine too closely why the thought of Henry defending her felt so significant. That evening, after dinner was finished and the kitchen cleaned, Hannah found herself sitting on the front porch in the cooling air, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The valley was beautiful at night, peaceful in a way that still surprised her. She had grown used to the harsh sounds of mining camps, the constant noise and chaos. Here, there was only the soft lowing of cattle in the distance, the occasional whinny from the barn, the chirp of crickets in the grass. The front door opened and Henry stepped out, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Mind if I join you? It is your porch. Hannah accepted one of the cups, wrapping her hands around its warmth. Thank you. Henry settled into the other chair, stretching his legs out in front of him with a satisfied groan. Long day. We had a situation with some cattle that got through a weak spot in the fence. Spent half the afternoon rounding them up. Everyone makes it back safely, eventually. One ornery old bull led us on quite a chase, but Miguel managed to get him corralled. Henry sipped his coffee, then glanced over at her. I heard you were working with the filly today. Miguel says you have a real talent for it. He is a good teacher. Hannah felt heat rise in her cheeks at the compliment. I enjoy working with the horses. It reminds me of better times. Your brother, Henry's voice was gentle. Yes, Thomas. He was 3 years older than me and convinced he was going to strike it rich. He was always chasing the next opportunity, the next big find. Hannah stared into her coffee cup, seeing the past reflected in the dark liquid. After our mother died, it was just the 3 of us, my father, Thomas, and me. Father was already broken by then. All his money sunk into failed ventures. Thomas thought if he could just find the right claim, he could fix everything. But he never did. No. He disappeared into the mountains 2 years ago. We searched, but there was no trace of him. I think he fell or got caught in a collapse, but we will never know for certain. The old grief sat heavy on Hannah's shoulders. Father gave up after that. He just stopped trying. He died 6 months later. The doctor said it was his heart, but I think he just decided he was done. And that left you alone. It was not a question. That left me alone, Hannah confirmed. With debts I could not pay and no prospects. I sold what little we had, bought my mare, and started riding. I had heard there might be work in California, so I aimed in this direction and kept moving. I ran out of money somewhere in Nevada. By the time I reached your valley, I had been living on nothing but hope for days. Henry was quiet for a long moment, just sitting with her in the darkness. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. I am sorry for your losses. Family is everything, and losing them the way you did that is a heavy burden to carry. What about you? Hannah turned the conversation away from herself, uncomfortable with the vulnerability she had just displayed. You mentioned your father. What about your mother? She died giving birth to my sister when I was 8. My sister lived 3 days. Henry's expression was distant, lost in memory. My father never really recovered. He loved this land and he did his best by me, but there was a sadness in him that never went away. I think he welcomed death when it came, even though he fought to stay alive long enough to teach me what I needed to know. So we are both orphans then, both alone, not as alone as we were. Henry looked at her, and in the starlight his eyes were dark and unreadable. You have a place here now, Hannah. I meant what I said. You can stay as long as you want, until you get tired of me. Hannah tried to make it light, teasing, but there was real fear beneath the words. I do not see that happening. Henry's tone was serious now. You work hard, you are good with the horses, and Mrs. Chen actually smiles now, which I did not think was possible. You fit here. I hope you can feel that. Hannah did feel it, which was terrifying in its own right. She had learned not to get attached, not to invest in places or people because everything eventually fell apart. But here on this porch, drinking coffee with this good man under a blanket of stars, she felt the walls she had built around herself beginning to crack. I am not sure I know how to stay in one place anymore, she admitted quietly. I have been running for so long. Then maybe it is time to learn how to stand still. Henry set down his coffee cup and stood, moving to lean against the porch railing. You do not have to figure it all out tonight. Just take it one day at a time. That is all any of us can do. He was right, Hannah knew. She had survived this long by focusing on the immediate, the next mile, the next meal, the next place to sleep. Perhaps she could apply that same principle to staying, to building a life rather than just surviving. One day at a time. One task, one interaction, one small step toward something resembling stability. One day at a time, Hannah repeated. I can do that. Good. Henry smiled at her, and Hannah felt that flutter in her stomach again, stronger this time. Now you should get some rest. Mrs. Chen mentioned something about baking bread tomorrow, which means an early start. Hannah rose, carrying her empty cup. Thank you, Henry, for everything. You are welcome. He held the door open for her, and as she passed him in the narrow doorway, their shoulders brushed. The contact was brief and innocent, but Hannah felt it like a spark, electricity jumping between them. From the way Henry's breath caught, she thought maybe he felt it too. She did not let herself look back as she climbed the stairs to her room. She needed distance, space to think, to process the tangle of emotions that had suddenly risen up inside her. Attraction, gratitude, hope, fear, all of it mixed together until she could not separate one feeling from another. In her room, Hannah prepared for bed mechanically, her thoughts elsewhere. She had not expected this when she rode into the valley on her dying horse. She had not expected kindness or opportunity, and she certainly had not expected to meet someone like Henry Blackwell, solid and decent, and completely unaware of how extraordinary that made him. She climbed into bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her. Somewhere below, she heard Henry moving through the rooms, checking locks and banking the fire as he did every night. The sounds were domestic and comforting, and Hannah let them wash over her as sleep finally claimed her. The weeks passed and October arrived, bringing cooler weather and the beginning of autumn colors in the trees along the creek. Hannah had fully settled into the rhythm of ranch life now, her duties clear and her place secure. She and Mrs. Chen worked together seamlessly, and Hannah had taken over most of the horse training work with Miguel, freeing him to focus on other tasks around the ranch. But more than the work, Hannah found herself becoming genuinely attached to the place and the people. Mrs. Chen's dry humor and uncompromising standards, Miguel's patient teaching and ready laughter, the other ranch hands who had initially been wary but had warmed to her over time, and Henry, always Henry, solid and steady at the center of it all. She tried not to think too much about Henry, about the way her pulse quickened when he walked into a room or how she found herself watching for him at mealtimes. It was foolish, dangerous even. He was her employer, and she was a woman with nothing to offer except a tangled past and an uncertain future. But the heart rarely listened to logic, and Hannah's heart had apparently decided to ignore all her careful warnings. It did not help that Henry seemed equally aware of her. She caught him watching her sometimes, his gaze thoughtful and intense, only to look away quickly when their eyes met. He found excuses to work near wherever she was fixing the garden fence while she weeded, organizing tack in the barn while she trained horses, lingering over coffee after dinner when everyone else had gone to bed. The tension between them grew gradually, a slow build of unspoken attraction that neither seemed willing to address directly. The situation came to a head one afternoon in late October, when Hannah was working with a particularly stubborn yearling. The young horse was fighting the lead rope, tossing his head and pulling back against her grip. Hannah held firm, speaking in low, calming tones, but the yearling was having none of it. He reared suddenly, yanking the rope hard enough to pull Hannah off balance. She stumbled, losing her grip, and the yearling bolted toward the open corral gate. Hannah scrambled after him, knowing that if he got loose on the open range they might not catch him for hours. She was nearly to the gate when strong hands caught her around the waist, pulling her up short. "Let him go," Henry said firmly, his arms locked around her middle. "He will not go far, and you will hurt yourself trying to catch him like that." But Hannah tried to pull free, watching the yearling gallop away across the field, but Henry held her fast. "It is fine. Look, he is already slowing down." Henry was right. The yearling had stopped about 50 yards out and was now standing still, looking back at them with an expression that could only be described as confused. "See, he does not actually want to leave. He was just being stubborn." Hannah stopped struggling and suddenly became very aware of Henry's arms around her, his chest pressed against her back, his breath warm on her neck. She froze, not wanting to move and break whatever spell had been cast in this moment. Henry must have realized the same thing because he went still as well. Neither of them moved for a long moment, the world narrowing down to just the two of them, standing in the dusty corral with the afternoon sun beating down, and their hearts racing for reasons that had nothing to do with runaway horses. "Hannah," Henry said softly, and there was something in his voice that made her shiver. She turned in his arms slowly until they were face to face. His hands had slid to her waist, and he did not remove them. This close, she could see flecks of green in his blue eyes, could count the faint freckles across his nose that spoke of long days in the sun. His gaze dropped to her lips, and Hannah felt heat flood through her entire body. "We should not," she whispered, but she did not pull away. "Probably not," Henry agreed, but he did not move either. They stood balanced on the knife edge of possibility, both of them knowing that if they crossed this line, everything would change. There would be no going back to the comfortable employer-employee relationship, no pretending that this attraction did not exist. It would complicate everything, make everything messier and more difficult. Hannah did not care. She had spent so long being careful, being practical, protecting herself. Just this once, she wanted to be reckless. She leaned in, closing the distance between them, and pressed her lips to his. Henry made a sound low in his throat, surprise or pleasure or both, and then he was kissing her back, his hands tightening on her waist, pulling her closer. The kiss was everything Hannah had not known. She was missing, warm and sweet and full of promise. She threaded her fingers into his hair, losing herself in the sensation, in the rightness of being in his arms. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Henry rested his forehead against hers. "That was unexpected," he said, a smile in his voice. "Was it?" Hannah was surprised to find herself smiling too. "Really? Maybe not entirely unexpected," Henry admitted. "I have been thinking about doing that for weeks. Only weeks. I have been thinking about it since the first time you made me coffee." Hannah pulled back enough to look at him properly. "This is a terrible idea, you know. I work for you. It makes everything complicated." "I know." Henry cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "Do you want to stop?" Hannah thought about it, really considered it. The sensible thing would be to step back, to apologize and pretend it never happened. But she had spent her whole life being sensible, and where had it gotten her? Alone, running, always looking over her shoulder for the next disaster. "No," she said firmly. "I do not want to stop." "Good." Henry kissed her again, slower this time, deeper. "Because I do not think I could if I tried." They stood in the corral kissing like teenagers until the sound of Miguel's laughter made them spring apart. The foreman was standing by the barn, the runaway yearling's lead rope in hand, grinning from ear to ear. "I caught your horse," Miguel called out, not even trying to hide his amusement. "You two looked busy, so I did not want to interrupt." Hannah felt her face flame red, but Henry just laughed. "Thank you, Miguel. We appreciate it." "I am sure you do." Miguel led the yearling back toward the barn, still grinning. "Mrs. Chen is going to have opinions about this." "Mrs. Chen has opinions about everything," Henry said, but there was no real concern in his voice. He took Hannah's hand, lacing their fingers together. "Are you all right with this, with us?" "I think so." Hannah squeezed his hand, marveling at how natural it felt. "Ask me again tomorrow when the panic has set in." "Fair enough." Henry brought their joined hands up to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "For what it is worth, I think this might be the best decision I have made in a long time. Even better than hiring me. That was the best decision. This is the second best." Henry's smile was warm and open and entirely genuine. "Come on. We should get back to work before Miguel tells everyone in the valley about what he just saw." "Too late for that," Hannah said, but she was smiling as they walked hand in hand back toward the barn. As predicted, Mrs. Chen did indeed have opinions. She cornered Hannah in the kitchen that evening before dinner, fixing her with a stern look that would have been intimidating if not for the slight twitch at the corner of her mouth that suggested suppressed amusement. "So, Mrs. Chen said, crossing her arms, "Miguel tells me you and Mr. Henry have reached an understanding. You could say that." Hannah focused on the vegetables she was cutting, not trusting herself to meet the older woman's eyes. "I suppose you think it is a bad idea." "I think it is about time, Mrs. Chen's response was so unexpected that Hannah's knife slipped, nearly nicking her finger. "You two have been dancing around each other for weeks. It was painful to watch." Hannah looked up in surprise. "You do not think it will cause problems? Me being an employee and everything." "Problems how?" "You are both adults. You care for each other. That seems simple enough to me." Mrs. Chen took the knife from Hannah's hand and set it aside. "Listen to me. I have known Mr. Henry since he was 18 years old. He is one of the best men I have ever met, kind, fair, honest. He does not play games with people's feelings. If he cares for you, it is real. I know that." Hannah twisted her hands together, anxiety bubbling up. "That is what scares me. Everything real in my life has fallen apart. My family, my home, everything. What if I ruin this too?" "What if you do not?" Mrs. Chen's tone was gentle now. "You cannot live your life afraid of what might go wrong. Sometimes you have to trust that things will work out." "I do not know how to do that." Then learn. Start with something small. Trust that dinner will not burn if you step away from the stove. Trust that the sun will rise tomorrow. Trust that Mr. Henry means what he says when he tells you he cares for you. Mrs. Chen picked up the knife and handed it back to Hannah. Now finish those vegetables. We still have a meal to prepare, regardless of your love life. Hannah took the knife, her thoughts churning. Trust. Such a simple word for such a complicated concept, but maybe Mrs. Chen was right. Maybe she needed to start somewhere, to take small steps toward believing that good things could last. Dinner that evening was almost normal, except for the way Henry's foot found hers under the table, and the way they both smiled at their plates when they thought no one was looking. Miguel caught Hannah's eye once and winked, clearly delighted by this new development. Even the ranch hands who joined them seemed to sense something had shifted, though no one said anything directly. After dinner, Henry walked Hannah out to the barn to check on the horses one final time before bed. It was their routine now, though tonight it felt weighted with new significance. They moved through the familiar tasks, checking water, distributing hay, making sure all the stalls were secure, but the comfortable silence between them had an undercurrent of awareness that had not been there before. "I want to do this right," Henry said suddenly, as they stood outside the barn looking up at the stars. "Court you properly, I mean. Take you into town for dinner, maybe a dance if there is one. I do not want you to think I am taking advantage of the situation. The situation being that I live in your house and work for you." Hannah could not help but smile at his earnestness. Exactly that situation. Henry turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I know the circumstances are not ideal, but my feelings for you are not about convenience or opportunity. They are real, and I want to do right by you." Hannah reached up to touch his face, feeling the rasp of end-of-day stubble under her fingers. "I believe you, and I appreciate the thought. But Henry, I do not need fancy dinners or dances. I just need honesty and respect. Everything else is extra. You will have both of those things, I promise, but I want to give you the extra too." Henry caught her hand, holding it against his cheek. "You deserve it. You deserve everything good." The sincerity in his voice made Hannah's throat tight. She was not used to being valued like this, being treated as though her happiness mattered. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for wanting me to stay." "I think I started wanting you to stay about 5 minutes after I found you in the valley," Henry admitted. "Even before I knew your name, I knew you were something special. Call it instinct. Good instinct." Hannah leaned into him, resting her head on his chest and listening to the steady thrum of his heartbeat. His arms came around her, holding her close, and for the first time in years, Hannah felt completely safe. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other in the quiet night, neither of them in any hurry to break the spell. Eventually, though, the cooling air and the late hour drove them inside. Henry walked Hannah to her door like a proper gentleman, though the kiss he gave her goodnight was anything but proper. By the time she finally closed the door between them, Hannah's lips were swollen and her heart was racing. She prepared for bed in a daze, her mind replaying every moment of the day. Everything had changed so quickly, and yet it felt inevitable, as though they had been moving toward this since the moment Henry found her in the valley. Maybe Mrs. Chen was right. Maybe she needed to trust that some things were meant to work out. November brought the first real cold, frost on the ground in the mornings and breath visible in the air. The ranch settled into winter routines, ensuring the cattle had adequate feed, repairing structures before the worst weather hit, preparing for the possibility of snow. Hannah had never experienced a California winter before and was surprised by how much she enjoyed it. The crisp air, the clear skies, the way the valley looked dressed in morning frost. It was beautiful in a stark, honest way. Her relationship with Henry continued to deepen, though they were both careful to maintain professionalism during working hours. Henry kept his promise about courting her properly, taking her into town on her days off for dinners at the local restaurant and walks through the streets. Chico was a small but growing town, full of people who had come west looking for opportunities. Some were friendly, others kept their distance, but Hannah gradually came to feel comfortable there. She met other women her age, including Sarah Thompson, the school teacher, who befriended Hannah and invited her to a ladies' social club that met twice a month. Hannah was hesitant at first. She had never been good at socializing, always too rough around the edges from her mining camp upbringing, but Sarah was persistent and kind. The social club turned out to be less formal than Hannah feared, just a group of women drinking tea and discussing everything from books to local gossip. She found herself actually looking forward to the meetings. Through these connections, Hannah began to feel like she was building a real life in Chico, not just surviving day to day, but actually putting down roots. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. One Saturday in mid-November, Henry took her to a dance at the town hall. Hannah had not been dancing since before her mother died, and she was nervous about it. Her dress was borrowed from Mrs. Chen's daughter's old wardrobe, altered to fit Hannah's taller frame, and she felt awkward and overly conscious of herself as they entered the crowded hall. But Henry was an excellent dancer, confident and skilled, and he led her through the steps with patient guidance. After the first few stumbles, Hannah found her rhythm and actually began to enjoy herself. They moved together easily, and she was acutely aware of his hand on her waist, the warmth of his body close to hers. Between dances, he introduced her to people, other ranchers, business owners, families who had known his father. Everyone was polite, though Hannah could see the curiosity in their eyes. The woman who had ridden into the valley on a dying horse, now dancing with Henry Blackwell. She knew they were wondering about her past and her intentions. "Ignore them," Henry murmured as they swayed together during a slower dance. "Let them wonder. It does not bother you, the gossip, not even a little." Henry looked down at her, his expression warm. "I know who you are, and that is all that matters to me." "Do you?" Hannah asked softly. "I have not told you everything." "Then tell me when you are ready, or do not. Your past is your own, Hannah. I care about who you are now and who you are going to be. The rest is just noise." His acceptance, complete and unconditional, made Hannah want to cry. She pressed closer to him, hiding her face against his shoulder, and they finished the dance in silence. Later, as Henry drove them home in the wagon under a blanket of stars, Hannah made a decision. "My father was a good man who made bad choices," she said quietly. "He invested everything in mining ventures that never paid out. He trusted the wrong people and believed in dreams that were never real. When my mother died, it broke something in him, and when Thomas disappeared, he just gave up. I tried to hold things together, but there was nothing left to hold. By the time he died, we owed money all over Silver Creek. I sold everything we had to settle the debts, but it was not enough. There were men who said I owed them for my father's promises. I knew if I stayed, they would find ways to make me pay. So you ran." Henry's voice was carefully neutral. "I ran," Hannah confirmed. "I am not proud of it, but I do not regret it either. Those debts were not mine. I did not agree to them, did not benefit from them, but that would not have mattered to the men who held them. You did what you had to do to survive. There is no shame in that." Henry reached over and took her hand. "Thank you for telling me. I wanted you to know, in case it matters. It does not the way you think." Henry squeezed her hand gently. But I am glad you told me. I want to know you, all of you, the good and the difficult and everything in between." Hannah let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "There is more. Things I am not proud of. Things I did to stay alive on the road." "Hannah, you do not have to. I stole food twice. From a store in a town whose name I do not remember. I told lies about who I was and where I was going. I slept in barns without permission. I am not the good, honest woman you might think I am." Henry pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her fully. "Listen to me. You did what you had to do to survive. You stole food because you were starving. You lied because the truth was dangerous. You slept where you could because you had nowhere else to go. None of that makes you a bad person. It makes you a survivor. How can you be so sure? Because I see who you are now. I see how you treat people, how you work, how you care. That is not something you can fake. That is character, real and true." Henry cupped her face in his hands. "Whatever you had to do to get here, I am glad you did it, because it brought you to me." Hannah kissed him then, hard and desperate, trying to pour all her gratitude and relief and growing love into the contact. Henry kissed her back with equal intensity, and for a while they sat there in the wagon on the dark road, holding each other like lifelines. When they finally pulled apart, Henry rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I know it is fast, and I know we have only known each other a few months, but I love you, Hannah Fletcher. I think I have since the day I found you in my valley." Hannah's breath caught. She had not expected this, not yet. They had been taking things slowly, carefully. But hearing the words spoken aloud, she realized she felt the same way. This man who had saved her life, given her work and shelter and respect, who looked at her like she was something precious, how could she not love him? "I love you too," she whispered. "I am terrified and I do not know how to trust that this will last, but I love you. Then we will figure out the rest together." Henry kissed her softly, sweetly. "One day at a time, remember? One day at a time," Hannah agreed. They drove the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, hands clasped, both of them grinning like fools. When they arrived at the ranch, Henry helped Hannah down from the wagon and walked her to the door, kissing her good night like he had every night for weeks. But this time, when they pulled apart, there was a new understanding between them. This was not just attraction or convenience. This was real and permanent and life-changing. Hannah went to bed that night with her heart full, staring at the ceiling and marveling at how her life had transformed. 3 months ago she had been broken and desperate, riding into an unknown valley on a dying horse with no hope and no future. Now she had work she enjoyed, friends she trusted, and a man who loved her. It seemed impossible, a fairy tale too good to be true, but it was true. It was real. And Hannah was finally ready to let herself believe it. December arrived with unexpected snow, a light dusting that delighted Hannah and sent the children in town into fits of joy. Christmas was approaching, and the ranch took on a festive air. Mrs. Chen began preparing special foods, and Miguel brought in a small pine tree that they decorated with strings of popcorn and paper ornaments. Hannah had not celebrated Christmas properly in years, and she threw herself into the preparations with enthusiasm. She used some of her saved wages to buy small gifts for everyone: new gloves for Miguel, a warm shawl for Mrs. Chen, books for the ranch hands. For Henry, she agonized over the choice for days before finally deciding on a hand-tooled leather journal. She had noticed he sometimes sketched in the evenings, rough drawings of the ranch and the valley, and thought he might like a proper place to keep them. She did not expect anything in return, so when Henry presented her with a small wrapped package on Christmas morning, she was surprised and touched. Inside was a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. Hannah opened it carefully and found a tiny photograph inside Henry, looking serious and handsome in his best clothes. "So you can keep me close to your heart," Henry said, looking almost shy. "If you want to, I mean." "Of course I want to." Hannah's vision blurred with tears as Henry fastened the chain around her neck. The locket was cool against her skin, settling just above her heart exactly as Henry had intended. "It is perfect. Thank you." They spent Christmas Day together as a household family, sharing an enormous meal that Mrs. Chen had been preparing for days. The ranch hands joined them, and the house rang with laughter and conversation. It was warm and joyful, everything Hannah had not known she was missing. She caught Henry watching her several times throughout the day, his expression soft and full of love, and each time her heart swelled a little more. That evening, after everyone had retired for the night, Henry asked Hannah to walk with him despite the cold. They bundled up in coats and scarves and stepped out into the crisp winter air. Snow crunched under their boots as they walked toward the barn, the sky overhead brilliant with stars. "I have something I want to ask you," Henry said when they stopped by the corral fence. His breath puffed white in the cold air, and he looked nervous in a way Hannah had never seen before. "What is it?" Henry took both her hands in his, holding tight. "These past few months with you have been the best of my life. You make me laugh, you make me think, you make me want to be better. You fit into this ranch, this life, like you were always meant to be here. And I keep thinking about the day I found you, half dead in the valley, and how close I came to losing you before I even knew you. I do not want to waste any more time. Henry." Hannah's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Marry me," Henry said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I know it is fast, and I know you might not be ready, but I am sure, Hannah. I am more sure of this than I have been of anything in my life. Marry me, build a life with me here. Let me love you for the rest of our days." Hannah stared at him, her mind racing. Marriage, permanent commitment, binding her life to his completely and irrevocably. Every instinct screamed at her to be cautious, to protect herself, to remember that everything eventually fell apart. But then she looked at Henry, truly looked at him. At his honest eyes and his open expression, and his work-roughened hands holding her so carefully. This man who had saved her life and given her a home, who had defended her to gossips and courted her properly, and told her he loved her without hesitation. This man who had proven over and over that he meant what he said. "Yes," Hannah said, and watched joy transform Henry's face. "Yes, I will marry you." Henry let out a shout of pure happiness and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and Hannah kissed him back with everything she had. This was real. This was happening. She was going to marry this incredible man and build a life with him in this beautiful valley. "I do not have a ring yet," Henry said when they finally broke apart. "I wanted to ask first, make sure you would say yes before I spent the money. I do not need a ring." Hannah was grinning so hard her cheeks hurt. "I have you, that is more than enough. You are getting a ring anyway." Henry kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her nose, "and a proper wedding. Whatever you want, however you want it." "I want it soon," Hannah said impulsively. "I do not want to wait." "Is that crazy?" "Not even a little bit." Henry pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. "January, February, you name the date." "January," Hannah decided. "The beginning of a new year, a new life. That feels right. January it is." Henry held her tighter. "I am going to make you so happy, Hannah. I promise you that." "You already do," Hannah told him, and she meant it with her whole heart. They stayed outside for a long time, making plans and dreaming about their future. When they finally went inside, Mrs. Chen took one look at their faces and broke into a wide smile. "About time," she said, pulling Hannah into a rare embrace. Welcome to the family, officially. The next weeks passed in a flurry of preparations. Hannah and Henry decided on a simple ceremony at the ranch with just close friends and the ranch hands present. Sarah Thompson agreed to stand up with Hannah, and Miguel would stand with Henry. Mrs. Chen threw herself into planning a feast, determined that the wedding celebration would be memorable even if the ceremony itself was small. Henry took Hannah into town and bought her a simple gold ring, perfectly sized to her finger. She wore it on a chain around her neck until the wedding, unable to keep her hands off it, still marveling that this was real. They set the date for the third Saturday in January, weather permitting. A local minister agreed to come out to the ranch to perform the ceremony. Hannah worked with Mrs. Chen to make a simple but pretty dress from cream-colored fabric they found at the general store. It was not fancy, but when Hannah tried it on, she felt beautiful. The only shadow on her happiness came from the knowledge that her family was not there to share it. Her mother would have loved Henry, she thought. Thomas would have teased her mercilessly but would have approved. Even her father, in his better days, would have been pleased to see her so well settled. But they were gone, all of them, and Hannah had to find a way to be happy without them. "They would be proud of you," Henry told her one evening when he found her looking sad. "You survived everything that was thrown at you and came out the other side stronger. That takes real courage. I wish they could meet you." "So do I." Henry took her hand, kissing her fingers gently. "But we will honor them in our own way. We will build something good here, something lasting. That is the best tribute to them I can think of." Hannah nodded, taking comfort in his words. He was right. The best way to honor the people she had lost was to live well, to be happy, to make the most of this second chance she had been given. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and cold but beautiful. Hannah woke early, too excited and nervous to sleep. Mrs. Chen came to help her dress and arrange her hair, twisting it up in a style that was both elegant and simple. Sarah arrived mid-morning with a small bouquet of winter flowers she had somehow procured, their white and pale pink petals perfect against Hannah's cream dress. "You look beautiful," Sarah said, her eyes shining. "Henry is not going to know what hit him." Hannah laughed, though her hands were shaking. "I cannot believe this is happening." "Believe it." Mrs. Chen made a final adjustment to Hannah's hair and stepped back, smiling. "You deserve this happiness, child. All of it." The ceremony was held in the ranch house sitting room with the furniture pushed back to create space. Miguel had built a simple arch from pine boughs, and the room smelled wonderful. Hannah stood at the top of the stairs, looking down at the gathering below. The ranch hands cleaned up in their best clothes, Sarah waiting at the bottom to walk with her. And Henry, standing under the pine arch in a dark suit that made him look impossibly handsome, his face lit up with love as he waited for her. Hannah descended the stairs carefully, her heart pounding. This was it. This was the moment everything changed permanently. And instead of being afraid, she felt nothing but joy. The ceremony itself was simple and brief. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and hard. Henry and Hannah spoke their vows clearly and firmly, promising to love and cherish each other all their days. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Henry kissed Hannah like she was the most precious thing in the world, and she kissed him back with her whole heart. The celebration afterward was joyful and loud, with more food than seemed possible and music provided by one of the ranch hands who played fiddle. Everyone danced, including Mrs. Chen, who had to be coaxed onto the floor but proved surprisingly light on her feet. Hannah danced with Henry, with Miguel, with each of the ranch hands in turn. Her feet hurt and her face ached from smiling, but she had never been happier. As evening drew in and the guests began to depart, Henry pulled Hannah aside. "Ready to see your wedding present?" "I thought the ring was my present. That was just the beginning." Henry took her hand and led her outside, across the yard to the barn. But instead of going inside, he guided her around the back to a small structure Hannah had noticed being built over the past few weeks. She had assumed it was a new storage shed or workshop. Henry opened the door and lit a lamp, and Hannah gasped. It was not a storage shed. It was a small house, one large room with a sleeping area separated by a half wall, a compact kitchen area with a new stove, a table and chairs, and large windows overlooking the valley. The furniture was simple but well made, and curtains already hung at the windows. "I know we could have just stayed in the main house," Henry said, watching her face anxiously. "But I wanted us to have our own space, somewhere that is just ours. Miguel and the hands helped me build it. Mrs. Chen sewed the curtains. It is not much yet, but we can add on as we need to." Hannah turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. Their own home. Small and simple, but theirs alone. A place to start their life together, to build their family. It was more than she had ever dreamed of having. "It is perfect," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect." Henry swept her into his arms, and this time when he kissed her, there was no one to interrupt, no reason to hold back. This was their wedding night, the beginning of everything. Hannah kissed him with all the love and gratitude and joy she felt, and Henry responded with equal passion. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwell," he murmured against her lips. "Home," Hannah repeated, and the word had never sounded sweeter. The months that followed were the happiest of Hannah's life. She and Henry settled into married life with ease, working side by side during the days, and falling into bed exhausted and content each night. The little house that Henry had built became a true home as they filled it with small touches, books Hannah borrowed from town, sketches Henry drew and Hannah framed, gifts from Mrs. Chen and Miguel. Spring came early that year, melting the winter snow and coaxing new growth from the earth. Hannah worked in the garden she planted beside their house, growing vegetables and flowers with equal enthusiasm. Her mare had fully recovered, and Hannah rode her daily, helping Miguel with the horses or simply exploring the valley that had become her home. By summer, Hannah knew she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but waited to be certain before telling Henry. When she finally shared the news one evening after dinner, he looked at her in wonder for a long moment, before breaking into the widest smile she had ever seen. "A baby," he said, his voice full of awe. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Hannah asked, suddenly nervous. They had not talked about children specifically, though she had assumed they both wanted them eventually. Happy does not begin to cover it. Henry placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "You have given me so much already, and now this. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I thank God for it every day." Hannah leaned into him, feeling settled and sure. "I am the lucky one. You saved my life, Henry, in every way that matters." "We saved each other," Henry corrected gently. "And now we are building something new together, something good and lasting and ours." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Hannah had to give up some of her more strenuous work as she grew larger. She chafed at the restrictions at first, used to being active and useful, but Henry was adamant that she not take unnecessary risks. Mrs. Chen backed him up completely, and between the two of them, Hannah found herself relegated to lighter duties: cooking, mending, supervising rather than doing. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Hannah complained one afternoon in September, 9 months after her arrival in the valley. "Humor us," Mrs. Chen said mildly. "You will have plenty of years ahead to work yourself to exhaustion. Right now, let us fuss over you." Hannah grumbled, but secretly enjoyed the attention. After years of having no one to care whether she ate or rested or took care of herself, being surrounded by people who worried about her well-being was still novel and touching. Their son was born in late February during a thunderstorm that shook the little house and made the oil lamps flicker. Dr. Martinez was there along with Mrs. Chen, and Henry paced outside like a caged animal until the baby's first cry rang out. Then he was through the door like he had been shot from a cannon, rushing to Hannah's side. "A boy," Hannah said tiredly, cradling the squirming, red-faced infant. "A healthy boy." Henry stared down at his son with an expression of such pure love and wonder that Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes. "He is perfect," Henry breathed. "You are amazing. Look what you did." "We did," Hannah corrected. "Together." They named him Thomas Henry Blackwell, after Hannah's lost brother and his father. Little Thomas proved to be a good baby, healthy, hungry, and possessed of a powerful set of lungs when he wanted attention. Hannah recovered quickly from the birth and threw herself into motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. Watching Henry with their son was a revelation. He was gentle and patient, singing off key lullabies and walking the floor for hours when Thomas was fussy. He changed diapers without complaint and marveled over every small developmental milestone, like it was a miracle. Hannah had known he would be a good father, but seeing it in practice made her love him even more. By the time Thomas was 6 months old, the ranch had grown considerably. Henry had bought additional land and hired more hands. The operation was thriving, and their reputation for raising quality horses had spread throughout the region. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable and secure in a way Hannah had never expected to be. On a warm evening in late summer, Hannah sat on the porch of their little house with Thomas on her lap, watching Henry work with a young horse in the corral. The baby babbled contentedly, waving his chubby fists at nothing in particular. The valley was green and lush with summer growth, cattle dotting the hills, the sky overhead endless and blue. "Look at your papa," Hannah murmured to Thomas. "He is a good man, the best man. You are very lucky to have him." As if he heard her, Henry looked over and waved. Hannah waved back, her heart full to bursting. She thought about the day she had ridden into this valley, half dead and desperate, expecting nothing. And she thought about everything that had happened since being found, being saved, being loved. Building a life with a good man in a beautiful place, creating a family to fill the emptiness left by all she had lost. It was not the life she had planned or expected. It was infinitely better. Henry finished with the horse and walked over to the porch, his shirt stained with dust and sweat, his hair wild. He looked tired and happy and entirely himself. Thomas squealed at the sight of him and reached out with both arms. "How are my two favorite people?" Henry asked, dropping a kiss on Hannah's head before scooping Thomas up and lifting him high. The baby shrieked with delight. "Your favorite people are hungry," Hannah said, standing and stretching. "I was just about to start dinner. Wanna help, always." Henry settled Thomas on his hip and followed Hannah inside their small home. As Hannah moved around the kitchen preparing food with her husband and son nearby, she felt a peace she had never thought possible. This was home. This was family. This was the life she had been searching for without even knowing it. And it all started because she had ridden into Henry's valley on a lame horse, and he had fixed both of them and asked her to stay forever. She had said yes, and it had made all the difference. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, cattle lost to illness and fences blown down in storms. Thomas was joined by a sister, Lucy, 2 years later, and then another son, Robert, 3 years after that. The little house was expanded twice to accommodate their growing family. eventually becoming a proper two-story home that stood beside the original structure Henry had built. Through it all, Hannah and Henry remained partners in the truest sense. They worked together, raised their children together, faced difficulties together. There were arguments, sometimes both of them were stubborn and passionate, but they always found their way back to understanding. The foundation of respect and love they had built in those early months never wavered. Miguel became Uncle Miguel to the children, teaching each of them to ride almost before they could walk. Mrs. Chen remained at the main house, claiming she was too old to change her ways but clearly delighted by the chaos of children running through the ranch. Sarah Thompson married a banker from Sacramento and moved away, but she and Hannah remained close through letters and occasional visits. Hannah never forgot where she came from or how close she had come to losing everything. She made a point of helping others when she could, hiring drifters who needed work, providing meals to travelers passing through, offering shelter to anyone who needed it. Henry supported her in this completely, understanding that her generosity came from remembering what it felt like to be desperate and alone. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Henry took Hannah back to the spot where he had first found her in the valley. It was late September again, the same time of year, though the day was cooler and clearer than that long-ago afternoon when Hannah had collapsed in the dust. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not been riding through here that day?" Henry asked, his arm around Hannah's waist. "If I had gone a different direction or stayed at the ranch?" "Sometimes," Hannah admitted, "but I try not to dwell on it. What matters is that you were here. You found me and you saved me, and everything else followed from that." "You saved yourself," Henry corrected. "You rode hundreds of miles alone with no guarantee of what you would find. That takes real courage. Maybe we saved each other then." Hannah leaned into his warmth, watching their 3 children play in the grass nearby, Thomas keeping a careful eye on his younger siblings. "I do not think I understood what salvation meant until I met you. I thought it was just about survival, finding food, finding shelter, staying alive one more day. But you taught me it is about so much more than that. It is about belonging somewhere, being loved, having a purpose beyond just existing." "I learned some things too." Henry turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Before you came, I was just going through the motions, working the ranch, building it up, but never really thinking about why. You gave me a reason for all of it. You and the children, you are my purpose." Hannah reached up to touch his face, this man she loved more with each passing year. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day, after you checked on my mare?" "I said a lot of things that first day. You said stay. And later, when you offered me work, you said I could stay as long as I wanted. Did you know even then?" Henry smiled. "I knew something. I knew you were important, that finding you meant something. I did not understand what yet, but I felt it. Call it fate or destiny or just dumb luck, whatever brought you to my valley. I will be grateful for it until the day I die." "Our valley," Hannah corrected softly. "It is ours now. All of this is ours together." "Together," Henry agreed, and kissed her with the same passion and tenderness he had shown on their wedding day 10 years before. Their children ran over then, Thomas complaining that Lucy was not sharing and Robert demanding to be picked up. Henry lifted Robert onto his shoulders while Hannah settled the dispute between the older two, and they all walked back toward home together as the sun began to set behind the western hills. That evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Hannah stood on the porch of their home looking out over the valley. The ranch had grown so much since that first day, more land, more cattle, more buildings. But the bones of it remained the same. The barn where Henry had taken her injured mare. The main house where Mrs. Chen had nursed her back to health. The valley stretching out green and beautiful in all directions. Henry came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything. The past 10 years. How different my life is now compared to what I thought it would be." Hannah laced her fingers through his where they rested against her stomach. "I spent so long running and fighting and just trying to survive. And then I rode into this valley and found you, and everything changed." "Best day of my life," Henry said simply. "Finding you there, half dead but still fighting. I took one look at you and knew my life was about to get infinitely more interesting." Hannah laughed. "Interesting is one word for it. Blessed is another. Complete. Joyful." Henry kissed her temple. "I could go on. Please do not. Your poetry skills are questionable at best." But Hannah was smiling, warm and content in his embrace. They stood like that for a long time, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Behind them, their home was warm and full of life, children sleeping, a fire banked in the stove, evidence everywhere of the family they had built together. Before them, the valley stretched out into shadow and mystery, holding the same beauty and possibility it had always held. "I love you," Hannah said quietly. "In case I do not say it enough. You say it plenty, but I never get tired of hearing it." Henry tightened his arms around her. "I love you too. Today, tomorrow, and all the days after that." Hannah closed her eyes, memorizing this moment, the warmth of Henry's body against her back, the quiet sounds of the valley at night, the weight of the locket around her neck that she still wore every day, though the photograph inside was now joined by tiny portraits of their children. The sense of absolute rightness that came from being exactly where she belonged. She had ridden into this valley on a lame horse with no hope and no future. And the cowboy who found her had fixed both the horse and Hannah herself and asked her to stay forever. She had stayed. She had built a life here, raised a family, found a home and a purpose and a love that would last all her days. And she had never, for even one moment, regretted saying yes. 20 years after that first fateful day, Hannah stood in almost the same spot where Henry had found her, but everything was different. She was no longer the broken, desperate girl who had collapsed in the dust. She was a woman in her 40s, strong and confident, with silver threading through her dark hair and laugh lines at the corners of her eyes. Her children were grown, Thomas working the ranch alongside his father, Lucy married to a doctor in town with 2 children of her own, Robert away at university studying law. The ranch had continued to prosper and grow. They now employed a dozen hands full-time and had a reputation for quality that stretched across California. Miguel had retired 2 years ago, though he still lived in a small house on the property and came around regularly to supervise the horse training he insisted no one else could do properly. Mrs. Chen had passed peacefully in her sleep 3 winters past, and they all still missed her dry humor and uncompromising standards. But the core of everything, Hannah and Henry, their love and partnership, remained as strong as ever. They had weathered storms, both literal and figurative, had celebrated triumphs and endured losses, had raised 3 children to adulthood and were now enjoying grandchildren. Through all of it, they had remained each other's constant, each other's home. A horse and rider appeared on the ridge above the valley, and Hannah smiled as she recognized her son. Thomas rode down toward her, easy and confident in the saddle, every inch his father's son. He had Henry's build and Hannah's dark hair, and he had grown into a fine young man. "Mother," Thomas called as he approached, "Father sent me to fetch you. Lucy and the grandchildren just arrived. Robert sent a telegram saying he will be home tomorrow." "A full house, then." Hannah patted Thomas's horse affectionately. "Your father must be beside himself with joy. You know how he gets when the whole family is together." Thomas grinned. He has been cooking all morning, convinced Mrs. Rivera does not know how to prepare enough food. Mrs. Rivera was their current housekeeper, a competent woman in her 50s who had learned quickly to ignore Henry's interference in her kitchen. Hannah laughed, imagining the scene. We should rescue her then. Come on. They rode back together, mother and son, through the valley that had been Hannah's home for 2 decades. As they crested the final rise and the ranch came into view, Hannah felt the same sense of gratitude and wonder she experienced every time she saw it. This beautiful place, this life she had built, this family she had created with Henry, it was everything she had never known to dream of. The house was indeed full of chaos when they arrived. Lucy's children, ages 4 and 6, were racing through the rooms with the tireless energy of youth while Henry tried ineffectually to corral them. Lucy herself was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Rivera, despite being told to rest. The whole place rang with noise and laughter and life. Henry looked up when Hannah entered, and his whole face lit up the way it still did after 20 years of marriage. He crossed to her immediately, kissing her soundly despite the presence of their children and grandchildren. "There you are," he said. "I was starting to think Thomas got lost looking for you. I was exactly where I told you I would be. You were impatient." Hannah kissed him back, not caring who saw. "But I am here now. Put me to work." The evening that followed was everything Hannah loved about having a large family, noisy and warm and full of love. They gathered around the large table Henry had built specifically to accommodate everyone, and the meal stretched on for hours as they talked and laughed and caught up on each other's lives. Hannah looked around the table at the faces of the people she loved most in the world and felt her heart swell, almost painfully. This was what it had all been for. The struggle and the fear and the long journey across the desert. The risk of trusting Henry when every instinct told her to protect herself. The hard work of building a life and raising children and keeping a ranch running. Every difficult moment had led to this: a table surrounded by family, a house filled with laughter, a life rich with love and meaning. After dinner, when the children had been put to bed and Lucy and Thomas had retired to their rooms, Hannah and Henry sat on the porch of their home as they had done countless times over the years. Henry's arm was around her shoulders and Hannah leaned into his warmth, comfortable and content. "It has been a good life," Hannah said softly, "better than I ever imagined possible." "The best," Henry agreed, "though I maintain it started getting really good the day a stubborn, half-dead woman rode into my valley on a lame horse and refused to die." Hannah elbowed him lightly. "I was not that stubborn. You absolutely were, still are." Henry kissed the top of her head. "It is one of the things I love most about you." They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds of the valley. Hannah thought about that long-ago version of herself, young and scared and desperate, riding into the unknown with no plan and no hope. If she could go back and tell that girl what the future held, she would never believe it. The idea that she would find not just survival but a home, a family, a love that would sustain her through decades, it would have seemed like an impossible fantasy. But it had all been real. It was real still, solid and lasting and true. "You ever wish things had been different?" Hannah asked suddenly. "If you had married someone from around here, someone without all my baggage and complications." Henry pulled back to look at her, his expression incredulous. "Are you serious? Hannah, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. I would not change a single moment of our life together, not even the hard parts, especially not the hard parts because those are what made us stronger. I just think about it sometimes, how much easier is overrated." Henry cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle but firm. "I do not want easier, I want you. I have always wanted you, from the moment I found you in that valley until this very second and every second still to come. Do you understand that? Hannah nodded, tears pricking her eyes. After 20 years, he could still make her cry with the depth of his love and his absolute certainty about them. I love you, she whispered. So much it scares me sometimes. Good scared or bad scared. Good scared. The kind that reminds me how much I have to lose if anything ever happened to you. Nothing is going to happen to me. We are going to grow old together, surrounded by children and grandchildren and probably great-grandchildren eventually. Henry wiped away the tear that had escaped down her cheek. We are going to sit on this porch when we are ancient and gray, and we are going to remember every moment of this life we built together. That is the plan, and I intend to stick to it. Hannah laughed through her tears. You cannot plan that far ahead. Watch me. Henry pulled her close again, and Hannah settled against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I am going to love you forever, Hannah Blackwell. That is not a plan. That is a promise. And as Hannah sat there in her husband's arms, surrounded by the valley that had become her home and the family that had become her world, she believed him completely. They had built something real and lasting together, something that would endure long after they were gone. Their children would carry it forward, and their children's children after that, each generation adding to the foundation they had laid. It had all started with a moment of desperate faith, Hannah riding into an unknown valley, Henry choosing to help a stranger in need. Neither of them could have known where that moment would lead, what it would become, but they had chosen each other, again and again, through every challenge and celebration. They had chosen love and partnership and faith in a shared future, and that choice had made all the difference. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, and the valley spread out before them in darkness and beauty. Inside the house, their family slept safely. The horses were settled in the barn, the cattle dotted across the hills. Everything was as it should be, peaceful and right. Hannah closed her eyes and sent a silent thank you to the universe, to fate, to whatever force had guided her to this valley and this man. She had been lost and he had found her. She had been broken and he had helped her heal. She had been alone and he had given her a family. Most importantly, he had asked her to stay forever, and she had said yes. That single word, spoken 20 years ago in a moment of desperate hope, had been the beginning of everything. And here, decades later, wrapped in Henry's arms with their whole life spread out around them, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that it had been the right answer. Forever had turned out to be exactly enough.